Good evening. Local Energy Advocates is excited to be hosting Jessica Guadalupe Tovar, Energy Democracy Organizer for the Local Clean Energy Alliance and coordinator of East Bay Clean Power Alliance. After growing up in East Los Angeles, Jessica worked for over 2 decades as an environmental justice organizer in a variety of urban, rural, and indigenous communities throughout California and Arizona. Before working for LCEA, she was an organizer for Communities for a Better Environment in Richmond, California, where she successfully mobilized against expansion of the Chevron oil refinery. LCEA was instrumental in the grassroots defeat of Prop 16, Pacific Gas and Electric's power grab in 2010, led the effort to defeat AB 2145, the utility bill to kill community choice energy in 2014, is active in local energy efforts on both sides of the bay, including the establishment of East Bay Community Energy in 2017, and has been a leader in the movement to democratize energy at the national level. It's notable that one of LCEA's primary movers and shakers and Jessica's colleague for many years, Al Weinrub, passed away on August 30th. Much of his work as an author will be preserved in the UMass Amherst Library collection of the Al Weinrub Justice Papers. Jessica will be providing tips now from East Bay's trailblazing energy democracy work, especially with regard to community advocacy in relation to the local electricity aggregation. Again, I'm very happy to present Jessica Guadalupe Tovar.
Thank you, everyone. So I want to preface, my voice is not what it usually is. I guess there's something going around, and so I kind of have a little bit of a froggy voice, so forgive me. If I do put myself on mute, I might be coughing, so forgive me for that, but I'm going to do my best tonight. We're also having a horribly bad bad air day. So just before joining this meeting, I had to close all my windows, running a fan with a filter, and just trying to take care of myself as best as I can in this situation. And all of this is not, of course, not related to what we're talking about today. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. So give me a second. And I'm not the best with like fumbling with these things, so just bear with me. Okay. All right. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I can't see you, but you all can see me and you can see my screen. Great. Okay, so yes, I'm with the Local Clean Energy Alliance. And I came on probably 8 years ago to work as the coordinator of something known as the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, which I'll be talking a lot about today. Needless to say, my work was centered around community choice energy. And at the time that I was hired and doing this work, there really wasn't any precedent. And all my previous work was environmental justice, so very heavily, deeply engaged in fighting the problem. And at the time, I was very interested in learning more about solutions. And I always knew solar energy was important, accessible, and part of the solution. But it wasn't until I started working at the Local Clean Energy Alliance that I really started to delve into the details of that solution, of which I'm going to share with you today. So the Local Clean Energy Alliance, some of our history, we were actually incubated by another nonprofit called Bay Localize back in 2008. And the reason why we were created was because of community choice aggregation policy in the state of California and the potential for creating community choice program that actually addresses solutions, climate change, and other pollution issues, which we'll talk about further. So as I said, I was hired to to be the coordinator of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. Now, prior to the establishment of East Bay Clean Power Alliance, there were a lot of efforts, and going back to the fact that there wasn't very much precedent for this kind of organizing work, we kind of fumbled a little bit. There were efforts to try to get our East Bay Municipal Utilities District to start a community choice program. That vote wasn't successful. Then there was an idea of asking the city of Oakland to start a community choice program. What ended up happening was our board of supervisors were interested in doing a countywide community choice program. And that is about 15 cities. It's a huge county. I think it's like something around 2 million people. So to have all these cities be part of a community choice program was very exciting. I came on to become the coordinator of this large alliance. And so one thing I want to highlight in the work that we're doing and that I want to get across to you today is to really be able to identify the roles that different allies, key leaders, and stakeholders can play in the formation of your community choice program. Obviously, active supporters. I imagine a lot of you today here are active supporters of your community choice, your nascent community choice program. You show up, you meet up, and you provide input for your program. And then there's active strategic supporters, folks who show up, meet up, represent a large constituency. So a good example of that would be like a union, a local, like the service workers, for example. They have a large constituency. They have a huge stake in the community choice program, and a leader could potentially say, I represent 2,000 members in our community, or something like that, for example. Then you have other allies who could sign on to your effort, maybe want to stay informed, and jump in during key actions as you move forward in advancing your community choice program. Then you have the greater community that you keep informed by interacting over social media, hosting webinars, and whatever other types of greater educational events you might have moving along. So one of the things I really recommend is, and we may have talked about this in the past before, is creating an alliance that covers all the territory that your community choice program would be covering, for example. And really distinguishing, what role each one of these different groups plays within the advocacy around your community choice program, how deeply they want to be engaged. And certainly your core of people are the people who are, deeply engaged in the details, right? And just to reiterate, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I had heard that Valley Green Energy Working Group was kind of like the precursor to developing your community choice program. And we had something like that in the East Bay too, and I'll talk about it in one of the near slides. The steering committee, that's what we called it. Just before we actually had a Joint Powers Authority board in place, we had something that was referred to as the steering committee. And at the time, it was being discussed of just having elected officials be on the steering committee, and maybe some technical experts. And we fought really hard to say, actually, community people and leaders should be part of this body as well. And the elected officials were kind of really leaning towards, well, we want technical experts to inform the design of our community choice program. Well, one thing I want to uplift is that community leaders and community people are the technical experts for their community. And so we play a very important role before elected officials or techno wants in what our community needs, right? When it comes to energy. So this steering committee was huge. It was made up of 40 different individuals. So you can imagine how hard it was for our county staff to facilitate discussions and ideas with a 40-person body, but we did it. It was convened by the Alameda County Community Development Agency, so they were the staff that facilitated the meetings that happened around the planning of this community choice program. What we did, what we were successful with, and then some things that came up that maybe were kind of compromised. We advocated for having community people be part of the governance and design of the program. So we advocated for a community advisory committee. At the time, we really wanted community people to sit on the board with the board of electeds, but this is where the kind of compromise came in. Having a separate community advisory committee, but having the chair of that community advisory committee sit on the board with the board of electeds. They are a non-voting member. According to California law, in order to be on a JPA board and have voting power, you have to be an elected official. But her role is very important because while she's the chair of the community advisory committee, she's able to carry the asks and the positions of the community advisory committee. She can also make proposals to the board. She can't vote on these proposals, but she can suggest things and help sway those votes in favor of what the community wants. So this is a very powerful position, and Olivia Eldred, who holds that position, has been doing a really fantastic job. One of my favorite people. Another thing we advocated for. Sorry, was there any question? Another thing we advocated for was to adopt our community benefit goals. So really including quantifiable economic benefits to the region, including jobs and community ownership of renewable resources. We advocated for what's called a local development business plan. Essentially, it's just a roadmap for how our agency can provide community benefits and investments over time as the agency makes money, right? So this is how to develop local renewable energy, how to create more jobs, how to build microgrids, for example, how to create a community investment fund, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Committing to taking steps to minimize impacts to workers displaced by the transition to clean energy. And one of the other asks was not to use unbundled renewable energy credits, mostly because unbundled renewable energy credits are dirty energy, and that's just a marketing scheme, and we didn't want to entertain that. We didn't win a solid no on that, but I think in the language it was kind of like, we'll avoid using them unless absolutely necessary. So like I said, you go for the gold, ask for what you need. You'll probably win some things, and then there'll probably be some things that you don't quite get. Labor and environmental justice unity positions. So one of the things that we did was we really focused on building relationships with local unions. And so also just having meetings with them about, hey, there's this agency we're trying to advocate for and build. There's going to be an opportunity to create jobs. We need your attention. You have a stake in this. Your members have a stake in this. We want to keep you engaged and informed. We want you to advocate with us. I have to admit, there were some very difficult conversations. It isn't always a smooth road with bringing in labor and environmental justice together to advocate together. Oftentimes, we're at odds with each other, and the system really perpetuates that division, right? But we were successful after having some very serious and difficult conversations. We were successful, and I want to name why we were successful. The women in a lot of the service unions and the nurses association were very strong in telling the building trades specifically that we have a stake in this and that we have a responsibility to do everything we can to advance environmental justice and climate justice. So even though we were dealing with some hard heads in some of the building trades, it was the women who really stood ground and held other unions and men in those unions accountable to the issues of climate and environmental justice. So I want to name that. We were also very intentional with including leaders from different sectors. I mentioned labor, but also the faith networks in our community, social justice, environmental justice, climate justice leaders, as well as people who work in like workforce development in clean energy. So really, really engaging all these different people to advocate with us because we all have a stake in this and we all should be at the core of governing and designing the program. Okay, so I did mention a lot of these already. Skip over. So there's also, I mentioned getting our goals adopted. Well, we had to come up with our goals for a community choice program. And when we did that, we were able to get them adopted into the governing documents of our community choice program. Very simple. I kind of simplified them, but you know, the document is much longer than what you're looking at. But very basically, it's about prioritizing the building of local clean energy resources, providing affordable and stable rates for electricity in comparison to the utility corporation, providing more clean energy than the state and the utilities offer, create good family sustaining local jobs, advancing local community ownership and control, improving community health and safety, and including community in the decision-making process. So those were our goals, and we got them adopted into the Joint Powers Authority governing document. We also came up with this very simple, low-tech kind of visual, because we were trying to communicate our vision for this community choice program, and really reiterating that we're not trying to create just another utility, and we're not trying to mirror what the corporate utilities are doing, but that we're actually centering engagement, community engagement, and that we're informing that local plan for building out assets, programs and assets in our community, and incorporating different aspects or approaches to energy, demand reduction. So like, you know, reducing our demand for more electricity. That's pretty much what that is. Conservation, right? And creating new local generation, integrating with the local generation with the market resources. A lot of community choice programs, of course, they're going to start by buying and selling energy off of the market, right? But what we're saying here is don't limit yourself to that. As you start your community choice program and you're selling electricity to the community and generating revenues, you're investing it back into the community. This also opens up other opportunities for behind the meter programs, new incentive programs, creating employment pathways and apprenticeships, and integrating new technology over time. We all know that technology is advancing and moving very fast. And all these pieces at play really speak to creating more environmental and economic justice. And at the same time, we see this as democratizing our energy when people engage and inform and are active in the ownership and the design and the decisions. That's energy democracy. So that's the visual for that. What's in the local development business plan? Well, it's a whole plan for how to do energy right at a local level, create jobs, and different incentives. So this is just some snapshots from the local development business plan. What I'm going to look into is dropping the actual document into the chat when I'm done with my slides. But it's pretty much creating services for people with barriers to employment, creating those apprenticeship programs. And I want to really name what isn't obvious here is we were advocating to really prioritize equity in these programs, recognizing that not everybody is in a union and not very many unions are diverse. Not enough women and folks who are from the LGBT community, for example, or disadvantaged communities in our communities are in those unions. And how do we get them there? And really advocating to make space and more opportunities, and also the inclusion of what we refer to as small local and emerging businesses, right? Because as we're moving into the clean energy economy, it's also an opportunity for women-owned businesses to get started, or cooperatives, for example. So it's really allowing space for new models and new businesses in this sector. All right. The local development business plan. I mentioned the demand response, fancy term for conservation of energy, reducing that energy demand, doing energy efficiency upgrades, the sealing of our windows, and making sure that we're not wasting energy, right? Because if your home has good energy efficiency, if it has, for example, it's well insulated and it's cold during the winter, you turn your heat on, maybe you only need to run your heater for an hour because your house is well insulated. You don't have to run the heater all day long, right? We all know that that's expensive and it's also wasteful. So if we have good energy efficiency, we're eliminating the waste of energy. Building electrification, you've probably heard a lot about that now. There's a big wave around electrification and switching from our dependence on gas appliances to electric appliances. It addresses the indoor air quality, and also it's using less of fossil fuels in our home, right? Or eliminating them completely, I should say. And you probably heard about how, pretty much cooking with gas, you're exposed to methane and other, chemicals. And when you make that switch from gas to electric, you eliminate that air quality, that pollution within your home, for example. But one thing I want to emphasize as an advocate is we like to look at this in a real holistic way. We really need to address what's powering our electrification. So if we have a giant gas plant in a community of color, and we have all these shiny, brand new electrified appliances, we're not really addressing the equity issue and what's powering that. So I want to uplift that. The same with transportation electrification. There's all these incentives for people who can buy brand new cars. That's fine. But what's more important is we really think about how these assets could be shared in the community. How do we electrify our buses? How do we electrify our trains and the way people travel within our cities or out of the city, for example, right? How do we switch out diesel trash trucks in our community with electrified ones to eliminate that pollution that's being in our communities, for example. Another idea besides the trash trucks, school buses. School buses are diesel buses. Our children sit in those school buses and are exposed to diesel pollution. Switching our school buses to electric would actually do so much great for our children's health, and especially those who already have existing asthma, for example. So just to uplift that. And then finally, a community investment fund. Community investment fund, what that is pretty much creating grant opportunities for nonprofit organizations to come up with innovative ideas to tackle energy problems in our community. One idea that I heard from a young man, and this was way before the community choice program started, he wanted to create cell phone charging stations, so a solar powered cell phone charging station for the unhoused community in his community. That is a need right there, right? A lot of unhoused people actually have cell phones. Well, they need to charge them, right? And sometimes that's to communicate with families, sometimes it's to communicate with emergency services. So I just wanted to blip that. We have a lot of community innovation. All we need is the resources to make it happen, right? All right. Another thing that's in our local development business plan is something called collaborative procurement. How do we make these jobs union? How do we make them family sustaining wage? Well, I think the opportunities with community choice is to be able to pool a bunch of small projects into one great big project so that it is eligible for project labor agreements. And then unions can negotiate a decent wage on a large project. If you look at putting solar rooftop to rooftop, oftentimes that's low wage work, temporary work, and we need to start thinking about how do we make this full-time, well-paid, long-term work. So if you start thinking about your county, all the rooftops on the schools, all the rooftops on the warehouses, all the rooftops on your municipal buildings, multifamily housing, then you have a lot of work, right? Other things in our local development business plan is community benefit adders, how to incentivize by using battery storage, by using low income workers and giving them opportunities, by using union labor, for example. So there's all these ideas that were studied and are in our local development business plan. Not all are implemented, just to emphasize that, but we're trying to get them implemented. So essentially, local development business plan is our roadmap for East Bay Community Energy to create jobs and community benefits for our communities. And just to kind of highlight, our community choice program is 5 years old. So we're at a point where we're starting to, where we've asked for metrics. We want to see how many jobs have been created, how much of that has been union, what's working, what's not, what do we need to change? So those are the conversations that are happening in our community around our community choice program. So this will give you kind of a glimpse of what to look forward to in the future, because I'll be honest with you, the organizing for clean energy just doesn't end. You need to voice the advocacy to make sure these programs get implemented. And I mentioned the metrics, the creation of local jobs. I'm going to wrap this up, but just to reiterate, all of this matters because of the pollution in our communities, the climate crisis, and for all the reasons that I know you all are here today. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I see a lot of activity in the chat. I'll pass it back to our facilitator. You want to pull some of those questions?
Yeah, so some of the questions have to do with what kinds of local jobs were created and what kinds of local energy was generated.
Yeah, I will say they haven't created as much as we would like. So as far as local generation, they are doing what's called a municipal critical facilities program. What it is essentially a microgrid on libraries, and their first phase included wasn't libraries. It was fire stations. It included a police station, food bank, and I can't remember what else. So they're doing this in different cities, and they're in phase 2 where now they're going to include, and a lot of this was because of advocacy, schools, community centers. We asked for senior centers. We also made a big stink about prioritizing police stations over community spaces. And a lot of that conversation was because we have a lot of immigrant communities, Black communities, and just recognizing the fact that police stations are not trusted spaces in our community and really, really highlighting what is deemed a trusted space in our community and prioritizing that. And so that's where the whole schools, community centers really was uplifted. And so that's been adopted for the second phase of the program. But it is slow. Like I said, our program's only 5 years old. So not a lot was done or it's in the works. A lot of what they've put out really are pilot programs and we're really pushing them to do more. I hope I answered that question.
So were there competing stakeholders who argued for using the cheapest a way to get, the cheapest rates versus the cleanest energy?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm good. This is how I'm gonna package it. There was a lot of gaslighting in the initial parts of our advocacy. I remember we were told, oh, don't worry about that. We just need to get this community choice program started and we'll talk about the details later. So there was a lot of brushing us off. This was one of my favorites. Somebody said, it's silly to think that you can address social justice with an energy program. And that one pissed me the hell off. As somebody who grew up in a polluted community, whose health was probably compromised as a result of that, that was really insulting to me. One of the other things we were told was, let's not be too innovative. Now more than ever, in the light of huge fires and smoke in our air and the advancement of using fossil fuels and nuclear energy and everything that we should be moving off from, this is the time to be doing it big and thinking bigger and thinking differently and advancing the things that we know are healthier and better for our communities. Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. And oftentimes we were told that all people really care about is cheaper rates and they don't care about this other stuff. And the reality is that actually we do care about jobs. We do care about generating local wealth in our communities. We do care about reducing pollution at a local and global level. So there was a lot of gaslighting. So thank you for asking that question.
So you mentioned that the county had 2 million people in it. Is that what you consider to be your service area? And what percentage of the people chose the CCA to get their energy from?
So our policy might be structured differently from your state. It isn't anything that people have to subscribe to. They're automatically enrolled. So that's how our policy is designed. And it was designed that way because it was hopeful that it would be more successful if people were automatically enrolled. Once your government says, yeah, we want in on this, everybody in that city is included. In this case, it was countywide. And actually, our community choice program has grown. It's no longer one county, but it includes 3 cities now from San Joaquin County. And that's the Central Valley, which has a different, I want to say a different makeup, but they have a huge interest in job creation. And so our community choice program is actually even bigger now than that. So just to kind of give you an idea, sometimes the pattern I've seen here in California is there are some community choice programs that are like just a city, but then there's also some community choice programs that are multi-county. And there's one particular community choice program that acts like Pac-Man and is just taking city by city and it keeps growing and growing. And it's kind of lost what I think is the whole point of community choice, because the bigger that it would get, I feel like the less we're able to really address local needs, if that makes any sense. So I advise not to be too big, but Yeah, it might look different in your community. Over here, we're talking about a lot of people, millions
So
of people.
in Massachusetts, community choice energy is an opt-out program, so people are automatically enrolled unless they choose to opt out. But so I'm just wondering whether people can opt out in California as well, and
Yeah,
whether
they can.
it's a substantial number of people.
They can opt out. I don't know the numbers, but what the opt-outs weren't significant enough. It was a small percentage. So they deemed that as very successful. They always assume that there will be some opt-outs. Um, like I said, it was under 5%. It wasn't very much. Um, Other things that happened at the time as we were advocating for community choice out here that I wanted to just share. The corporate utility, uh, and this goes back to what corporations do with trying to hijack narratives. They started a program called Solar Choice, and that was designed to confuse people, right? A, they knew they had to be competitive, and B, they wanted to murky the waters, which is what they do best, right? And so we had to do a lot of advocacy against that. They were successful in starting the program, but it's their program. I don't even know how it operates. I don't even know if it was very successful, but fortunately, community choice ended up being very successful out here anyway, in California.
And how many people are actually involved in your organization?
That's an interesting question. In our organization, well, we have 3 paid staff, 2 staff volunteers, so that's a staff of 5. Um, we have a steering committee, and what we do, because we know where we can't do this alone, we really center our work around establishing alliances for the work that we do. So I heard somebody mention a lot of the different propositions that were trying to gut community choice policy in California. We were successful in fighting them because we created a statewide coalition of community choice advocates to protect the policy, because the corporate utilities, they're bullies. They like to destroy their competition, and they see community choice as their competition. So every year we would see a new bill that was trying to destroy community choice policy in our state. Fortunately, they were not successful. But what I have seen them be successful with more recently is the gutting of incentive programs like net energy metering. In the state of California, they've gutted the incentive program. So the amount of money that one could make from selling excess solar from their own solar system has been ratcheted down significantly. Um, and the reason why they do that is they want to eliminate their competition, but they also want to keep you dependent on them for energy. They want to keep you, and this is the way I'll describe it, the only relationship that they want us to have with energy is to keep paying the bill and nothing more, right? Because that makes their investors richer. So I just want to highlight that. They'll do anything they can to try to destroy their competition and keep us hooked on paying them to provide our energy.
Mhm. Has there ever been any discussion of the CCA becoming a cooperative with the energy actually owned by the members?
No, that has not come up. But one of the things that we were hopeful of is that would create more opportunities to start co-ops. And there was a cooperative effort started. It wasn't entirely successful in terms of being like a solar cooperative. And part of that is because of some of the going back to the utilities making it difficult. Um, it hasn't been as successful as I think it could have been. And one thing I want to uplift about California, because I've been asked this before, we don't have like in some places that have like renewable energy cooperatives. We don't have anything like that, but we're hoping that at some point that we can have something similar to that, because we do see that there's a potential for opportunity there.
So one person asked, why is California so far ahead? And is there state policy that we need to help pave the way for in Massachusetts?
Sorry, I can't help but laugh because everybody says that, but it's kind of not true, I think. We're just like everywhere else, we have to fight to get these good things done in our communities. And it's I feel like when I came to this work, I felt like I was always dealing with corporations and fighting corporations when it came to fighting pollution. Well, it's the same when you're dealing with solutions to clean energy. You're still fighting these same corporations that want to dominate. And that's why we've seen the utilities attack net energy metering policy at the statewide level. And not just in California, but they've been going state by state throughout the nation. Like they actually did this in Florida, and believe it or not, the Republican governor of Florida reversed it, but the Democratic governor in California didn't. So just to highlight, when people say California is advanced, I was pushed back on that. I think we have a lot of will to fight, and some things that we've won as a result of that. But I will reiterate, justice is never a given. You got to build those coalitions and have people ready, because this work is about fighting for what we need and what's right.
Very important points. So has your organization provided any training for technical skills? And have you gotten any grants to fund any training for local people?
That's a great question. As a result of doing a lot of this advocacy work with the Community Choice Program around our Community Choice Program was voted on in 2016. The JPA was in place in 2017. And around 2017, 2018, I was like, wow, we really need kind of to focus on literacy around clean energy. And part of that is because a lot of it is very technical. A lot of it is like acronyms. It has its own language. It's English, but it's not English, if that makes sense. And then it's kind of like layers, right? It's like if it's not accessible to an English speaking person, it's less accessible to a person who doesn't speak English, right? So I did pitch a lot of ideas for doing kind of education. I like to call it knowledge share. And it wasn't ever funded. And I was really frustrated with that. And so what I did was, and we're fortunate that we do get some unrestricted funds from grantors, and a lot of donations from individuals. So with that, we've been able to do, I just said, you know what, if a funder's not going to fund this, I'm just going to do it because it needs to be done. And so we've been doing Spanish workshops with Spanish speaking women around clean energy issues, and a lot of what I talked about in the presentation, but in Spanish. And we do the same with youth. So I've really focused on Spanish speaking women and youth, particularly because I wanted to build that base and communicate this. And it's been cool because with the kids, when you share a concept with them, I like to tell them, okay, now get creative. How would you explain this to your friend? How do you think we should talk about this to community people? And at the time during the pandemic, we weren't doing things in person. They were creating slideshows of visuals. And so we used that and we translated them into Spanish, and we used that to train the Spanish speaking women, and it worked. We're still working on it, but we have been doing that kind of work. I personally, like, if I could focus on anything, I'd probably just focus on that. But there's so much work to be done. So, yes, that's a very important part of it. And I do think we need to be intentional about who we're reaching out to and making sure, there's a lot of, I feel like, again, there's like a whole wave of, energy, equity and energy and this and that. Well, in order to do that, you have to give those opportunities to folks of color, to folks with different backgrounds, and give them the information that they need to do the advocacy. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Hmm. Going back to your slide about your goals, which were the easiest and most challenging to actually achieve?
The easiest, I will say, is the jobs and local wealth. And I will say it was easier, like, so going back to Al Weinreb, he was very intentional about when he would talk to elected officials to really center everything around creation of jobs and economic opportunities, because that's what local electeds want to be known for. That's what they want to be able to say when they run for office again is, I helped generate jobs, I helped create more opportunities, I increased our economic health of our community, right? So a lot of it was really around that. But it depends what community you're talking to, right? And of course, people are going to say, I care about having more affordable rates. Um, the reality of the situation with that is community choice rates are only like a penny cheaper than the utility. Where it really matters and it's really felt is when we're paying for electricity and now you have a community choice agency, is having folks understand that that money is kept locally and reinvested back into the community, and you can advocate. I'll give you an example. There was a medical baseline battery program that was launched. Again, a pilot. I would like to see it expand. But they were able to give away, I think it was like 100 medical baseline batteries to low-income communities who have a medical need to keep like a oxygen machine going in the middle of a power shutoff, for example. So, folks who have a medical need have a huge stake in energy, right? In the middle of a power shutoff or some kind of unforeseen, like, climate crisis. Over here in California, we're vulnerable to earthquakes. I mean, there's a lot of things in different places, right, that we're concerned about. Yeah, so just really, depending on who you're talking, really emphasizing on what their stake is, what's important to them. And does it matter to you to save $5 on your bill, or would it matter to you to ensure that disabled people have access to power in the event of a shutoff, right? Does it matter to save $5 on your bill or to create a microgrid on a community center to ensure that people have power in the event of a crisis that they can go to because they can't have solar on their home, for example. So that's just an example. Is like we have a lot of these discussions at our local community choice program because we want to use our money wisely in investments that will be felt and shared by everyone, as opposed to just offering a few bucks off the bill, right? So this comes up all the time. And so, really looking at the long-term benefits and the shared community benefits over just having the $5 off the bill. I hope that made sense.
So are your efforts integrated with mutual aid networks around climate resilience? It
Yeah,
sounds
that's a
like
great,
what you've mentioned are good examples of that, but
yeah. Well, one thing I will say is our local community choice program. Um, so that community investment fund that I mentioned, the year that the shutdown happened because of the pandemic, normally that money was for community innovation grants, but because of the emergency shutdown, that money was then used to, there was like a series of things, 3 or 4 things, to help people have access to groceries was one, help people who have um, who are behind on bills to make sure their power wasn't cut off. There was other things too, and I can't remember exactly. And then chunks of money given to the local, what do you call that? The food banks. I can't remember exactly what else. So there were a lot of that fund, those funds were used for the need that existed in that moment, right? So a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people don't have the option of working from home. And so there was an immediate need for groceries and things like that.
so I wonder if you could say a little more about how you generate the funds that you are using so well for your community.
Mhm. Yeah, so when we have our community choice program and it's online, they take over providing electricity to you, right? So the way it works here is the line item on our bill, because our bill includes electricity, gas, and then infrastructure charges, the poles, the wires, the delivery, transmission. Um, so the line item for electricity no longer goes to the utility corporation, but it stays with this local agency. And at the end of the fiscal year, when the agency goes over their budget, they go over how much surpluses they've generated, how much money they're going to put in the bank for a rainy day, how much money they're going to allocate for the next medical baseline program or the critical municipal facilities microgrid program. Um, and as a community, you can advocate and say, hey, there's an explicit need right now. And this is what happened in California. There's an explicit need right now for local microgrids, because what was happening back in 2020, actually 2018, you may have heard of this. There was a horrible wildfire that was caused by down power lines, PG&E power lines, that actually set fire to a whole community, killed about 85 people. And then it caused huge amounts of smoke in our communities. And it also, the utility started doing what they called planned power shutoffs. Yes, Paradise, California, abruptly shutting off power and leaving people without electricity. Um, and so at that time, people were saying we need more microgrids, islandable solar with battery storage. We need to be able to, for medical baseline folks to be able to keep their, power their breathing machines, whatever it is, or be able to refrigerate breast milk or diabetes insulin, for example, that needs to be refrigerated. Certain medications that need to be refrigerated. We need microgrids to do that. And then also, because we were inundated with so much smoke from the Paradise Fire, that folks were saying we also need air filtration. You need energy to run air filters, which is what I'm doing now. I have my fan and filter right in front of me right now because we're going through it as we speak. So we're able to advocate for the things that we need and make sure our community choice program funds them. And the people who make the decisions on the board of the community choice program are the local electeds that represent our cities. Now, can you advocate to a local corporate, to a corporate entity and tell them what you need in terms of your energy needs? No, they only listen to their investors, right? Unless you're an investor, you really have, unless you have millions of dollars invested into a corporation, you have no say in what they're doing. Well, at least here with the community choice program, we're able to advocate and exercise our energy democracy. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and unfortunately in Massachusetts, so far anyway, the aggregation programs have not been allowed to use funds except for situations where they will the use of the funds will benefit all subscribers, not a subset of subscribers. And so we, so far anyway, we have not been able to focus our efforts on the most vulnerable. But that's a Massachusetts problem, and we will take California example and hopefully use it to our benefit. So I'm going to turn it back over to Darcy and Andra to close out. Thank you so much, Jessica, for all your information and how well you've
Thank you.
questions.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Thanks so much.
You've been so inspiring. I mean, I think people really appreciated what you've been saying, and just it has made us think about all the possibilities. So really appreciate your time and the work you're doing in California.